Imagine for a second, right, that you just stumble across this 2,000-year-old letter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it's written by someone from, a completely different culture, an entirely different continent, just a totally different worldview.
Right.
But instead of trying to figure out what their world was actually like, you just read it as if it were like a modern text message sent to your phone this morning by a close friend.
I mean, you would end up with a wildly inaccurate understanding of what that person was even trying to communicate.
Exactly.
By doing that, you're essentially projecting all of your own modern assumptions, your cultural slang, your personal context, right, over their original words.
It would be a complete misinterpretation. And yet, when it comes to one of the most influential collections of ancient texts in human history, which is the Bible, that is happening constantly.
Yeah, it really is.
Welcome to today's deep dive, where we are looking at a stack of sources that challenge the way we read ancient texts. Specifically, we're diving into two really comprehensive volumes by Jeff Reed.
Right, his work on the first principles of biblical study and the historical unfolding of the early church.
So what's our exact mission for this deep dive today?
Well, the mission is twofold. First, we are looking at this material to rescue the lost art of reading ancient texts for their actual original meaning.
We want to strip away all that modern noise.
Exactly. And second, we're going to apply that interpretive method to decode something truly fascinating. We're looking at the explosive viral growth of the first century Christian church.
Right.
We really want to figure out the actual mechanics of how this tiny marginalized group became, a massive global movement.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we live in a world of absolute information overload right now.
Oh, totally.
And in this environment, it is incredibly easy to pull an ancient quote totally out of context, slap it on a beautiful sunset background for social media, or, use it to justify a modern agenda.
It happens all the time.
But these sources make a really compelling argument. If you want to truly master this material, you can't just skim it for a quick hit of inspiration.
No, you can't.
You have to learn how to read it the exact way the original authors intended for it to be read.
And that requires tackling a very specific problem in our modern reading habits, which are heavily influenced by our postmodern culture.
Right. So before we can understand the history of the early church, we actually have to understand how to read the history book itself.
Exactly. We have this tendency today to believe that the reader determines the meaning of a text, not the author.
Oh, yeah.
You see this all the time in popular study methods. A group of people will sit in a circle, read a passage, and the facilitator will go around the room and ask, what does this verse mean to you?
I've definitely been in groups like that. I mean, on the surface, it feels highly democratic, right? It feels inclusive.
Yeah, it does feel that way.
Everyone gets a voice, nobody's interpretation is technically wrong, and it really fosters a sense of community.
Well, it definitely fosters a mood. But scholars argue that this approach fundamentally strips the text of its true authority. They actually use a rather blunt term for this kind of group dynamic. They call it a pooling of ignorance.
The pooling of ignorance, that's harsh, but I get it.
To back this up, the sources reference E.D. Hirsch, who's a prominent English professor, and Walter Kaiser, a well-known theologian.
Okay.
Hirsch points out a severe logical flaw here. When modern literary critics basically banished the original author, they essentially usurped the author's place.
Right, because someone has to decide what it means.
Exactly. If the person who wrote the words doesn't determine the meaning, then you just have a multiplicity of readers, and each one is claiming equal authority to decide what is true.
So this whole concept of the death of the author actually just means the death of any objective meaning at all. It turns the text into, like, a Rorschach test.
That's a really great way to put it. And Walter Kaiser takes this further. He argues that the most fundamental rule of interpretation is reproducing the exact sense that the author originally intended.
You can't just bypass the author.
Right. You cannot banish the author, because if you do, the text just becomes a mirror reflecting the reader's own biases right back at them.
I mean, I get that for a normal history book or, a piece of classical literature.
Yeah.
But I have to push back here a little on behalf of anyone listening.
Sure, go ahead.
People might be thinking about the religious nature of this specific text. For adherents, the Bible is considered divine revelation, right?
Yes, that's the core belief.
So if believers think God is the one ultimately speaking, doesn't that sort of override the normal, everyday human rules of reading and grammar? Like, God is speaking, so human rules don't apply.
It's a very common hurdle for readers, actually, and Kaiser addresses it head-on through the concept of accommodation.
Accommodation. What does that mean in this context?
The theological argument is that when God spoke, he accommodated mankind by choosing to use human language.
Oh, I see.
He didn't invent a mystical, ethereal language. He worked through the specific vocabularies, the cultural idioms, and, the distinct, quirky personalities of the human writers of that specific era.
Meaning, because it arrived in human language, the normal rules of human communication still have to apply.
Precisely. If it's human language, it follows human syntax. Therefore, personal application like asking what this means to me has to be a secondary act.
So you can't start there?
No, you aren't allowed to ask what it means to you until you have done the hard work of understanding the author's original words and intent.
That makes a lot of sense.
What's fascinating here is that humans actually already possess these basic principles of interpretation natively.
Well, we do.
Yeah, you don't need a specialized academic degree to understand this concept. We do it every single day just by knowing how to hold a normal conversation.
Right.
When a friend is talking to you, your brain automatically tries to figure out what they're trying to say, not what you creatively want their words to mean.
When you put it like that, it feels incredibly obvious. I mean, if I treated my friends the way some people treat ancient texts, I wouldn't have any friends left.
You'd be constantly twisting their words.
Exactly. And this naturally brings up the next major hurdle the sources identify. Because if the author's intent is the only thing that truly matters, then you can't just read a single sentence or a single verse in a vacuum.
No, definitely not.
You have to understand the overarching story that author's trying to tell.
Which brings us to the concept of the meta-narrative.
Right, the big story.
Yeah, a meta-narrative is basically one large, overarching story that explains reality. Now, our modern culture largely rejects the idea of a meta-narrative.
We really do.
We tend to operate under the assumption that there are many small stories, many valid worldviews, but no single cohesive story that puts the whole world together.
But the Bible itself claims to be exactly that. It presents itself as a meta-narrative.
Yes, it claims to be a continuous, unified promise plan.
And it starts with creation in Genesis and ends with the restoration of the world in Revelation.
Exactly. And if you don't grasp that big story, you are guaranteed to misinterpret the smaller individual parts.
There's a brilliant everyday analogy for this in the material that I found so helpful.
Oh, the angry friend analogy?
Yes. Imagine someone is furious with you. They're venting, they're talking fast, throwing all kinds of accusations around.
Oh, just a barrage of words.
If you don't know what they are mad about, if you don't know the overarching subject of their anger, you will misinterpret every specific word they say to you.
You'll just hear what you want to hear.
Exactly. You might focus on a minor detail they mention, get defensive about the wrong thing entirely, and totally miss the actual reason they are upset.
It illustrates the point perfectly. If you don't know the primary subject, the particulars make absolutely no sense.
Not at all.
And this leads into a strong critique of a very popular modern method known as inductive study.
Ah, yes, the inductive trap.
That's the one.
This is the idea that you should study every tiny grammatical detail, look up the Greek root of every single word in the sentence, and just build up from the microscopic details, hoping you'll eventually figure out what the whole chapter is about.
Yeah, the sources argue this is incredibly laborious. It's often very discouraging for the average reader, and it frequently just misses the author's main point.
It's like looking at a single pixel on a TV screen and trying to guess the plot of the movie.
That's a great visual.
Right.
Yeah.
You can study the red, green, and blue values of that one pixel all day long, but you have to zoom out and see the whole screen, the author's overarching intent, before the colors of that specific pixel actually contribute to a moving picture.
That is exactly the mechanical flaw of pure inductive study.
So what's the alternative?
The alternative provided by the material is called the author's intention statement.
Okay, how does that work?
Instead of getting bogged down in the microscopic details first, you zoom all the way out, you read a large section and look for the subject, meaning what is the author generally talking about?
Find the main topic, got it.
Then you look for the complement, what are they actually saying about that subject?
Okay, the subject and the complement.
Right. And finally, the purpose. Why are they taking the time to write this to their audience? Only after you grasp that big picture do you zoom in to decode specific, confusing words.
Wow, once you realize how crucial this overarching intent is, you start looking at historical documents completely differently.
It changes everything.
Let's take this interpretive lens and apply it to one of the most fascinating historical narratives in existence. I'm talking about the Book of Acts, which documents the birth of the Christian church.
So if we apply our new reading rules to Acts, We can't just start reading chapter 1 and guessing what it means.
Right. We have to start with the author.
Yes. We first have to ask, what was the author's intent? Who wrote this and why?
Well, the author is Luke. And when you look at how Luke actually wrote this, he wasn't just throwing together a random scrapbook of miracles and travel logs.
Not at all.
Acts is actually volume 2 of Luke's grand history, with the Gospel of Luke serving as volume 1.
Luke was a really meticulous historian. He explicitly states his intention right at the beginning. He was writing to a man named Theophilus.
Right, to give him an exact, carefully investigated framework.
Exactly, a framework of the Catechism, which simply means the foundational teaching that Theophilus had already received.
So he's providing the solid historical architecture to support the theology.
Yes. And if you look closely at the text, Acts chapter 1, verse 8 serves as the literal architectural blueprint for the entire book.
That's the famous moment where Jesus tells his followers they will be witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth.
It's a highly specific geographical and cultural roadmap. The rest of the book meticulously tracks that exact expansion step by step.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Luke doesn't just write a continuous, unbroken wall of text.
No, he structures it very intentionally.
Right. He actually leaves structural literary markers or summary statements embedded in the narrative.
Like in Acts 6.7, 9.31, and 12.24.
Yeah. These verses act almost like scene changes in a play. They divide the book into 6 distinct panels.
It's such a sophisticated literary device. Each panel describes a chaotic, dynamic phase of growth, followed by a summary statement that basically pauses the narrative to report on the unstoppable forward movement of this new worldview.
It's tracking the progress.
Exactly. It starts with a heavily Jewish-oriented beginning in Jerusalem. Then the next panel pushes through intense persecution into Samaria.
Expanding the borders.
Right. Then it breaks massive cultural barriers to reach the Gentiles and ultimately marches all the way to Rome, which was the very heart of the known empire.
So as we watch this movement expand from panel to panel, moving geographically and culturally across the ancient world, it begs the ultimate question. What actually fueled this?
That is the million-dollar question.
Seriously, how did a tiny, marginalized group of people in the first century, with no money, no political power, and obviously no printing presses, start history's most viral movement? Why did it work so well?
That is the core question these sources attempt to answer. And to understand the secret sauce of the early church's explosive growth, we have to contrast it with modern methods.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Today, Western churches, and really most modern organizations, default to a corporate organizational enterprise model.
Meaning they rely on heavy infrastructure, big buildings, paid staff, programs, and, a top-down hierarchy. It's very structural.
Yes. They prioritize what the sources call individualized discipleship, but within a corporate structure. But the book of Acts shows a mechanism that is entirely different.
A completely different approach.
It details the spontaneous expansion of the church. It wasn't driven by a rigid corporate hierarchy. It was orchestrated by the Holy Spirit through a shared conviction, fueled by an incredibly intense community life.
And this brings us to a Greek concept that is so often misunderstood today, which is koinonia.
Oh, koinonia, yes.
If modern people know this word at all, they usually translate it simply as fellowship.
Right, which in our modern context, fellowship usually just means having coffee after a meeting or hanging out with friends.
Yeah, good feeling among friends.
Which is a massive dilution of how a first century person would have understood the word. The sources bring in scholar Justo Gonzalez to clarify the historical mechanics of this. In the Roman Empire, koinonia did not mean a coffee hour.
Far from it.
It actually meant a corporation, a company, or a common enterprise.
A common enterprise. That totally shifts the dynamic from a casual social club to a committed partnership.
It changes the entire operational model. The early Christians literally shared their goods and resources.
The text actually describes how they would sell their possessions and distribute the proceeds to anyone who had need.
You have to remember, there was no governmental social safety net in the first century.
Right. No unemployment checks.
Exactly. If you were marginalized or persecuted for a new belief, you could literally starve. Koinonia was a radical solidarity.
They were heavily invested financially and socially in this common enterprise.
It was an intense, shared survival strategy and a whole way of life, not merely a weekly gathering.
And as that radical, fiercely loyal community began to expand, it obviously required a strategy to sustain it. The material outlines what is called a Pauline cycle, referring to the Apostle Paul's specific method of church planting.
Yes, his strategy was brilliant.
And it's shockingly simple, yet highly effective. He didn't just wander around the Mediterranean hoping to bump into people.
No, Paul was a highly intentional strategist. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sources reveal a clear four-step mechanism behind his success.
Okay, what was step one?
First, evangelize strategic cities. Paul didn't go to random villages. He went straight to the cultural and economic hubs of the Roman Empire.
Right, the big cities.
He would go to the Agora, the marketplace of ideas, like his famous speech at Mars Hill in Athens.
The Agora was essentially the ancient internet. I mean, it wasn't just a place to buy fruit. It was where philosophers, merchants, and politicians debated.
That's a perfect analogy.
By planting an idea there, Paul ensured that merchants and travelers would carry that message out via the Roman trade routes to the rest of the empire, without Paul having to physically travel to every single town himself.
That is the exact mechanism of viral spread in the ancient world.
So what's step two?
Second, after planting the seed, he would establish local churches by staying and teaching for long periods.
He didn't just drop a controversial message and flee.
Right. The historical record notes he spent 2 whole years in Ephesus, for instance, just laying a deep, solid foundation of teaching so the community wouldn't collapse under pressure.
That makes sense. And step three.
Third, he would entrust the work to faithful local leaders. He didn't build a massive organization where all decisions had to run through him.
Oh, wow. So he empowered the people native to that specific culture to lead their own communities.
Which is brilliant for decentralized growth. And finally, fourth, he maintained a partnership through regular visits and writing letters.
Letters which, of course, make up a huge chunk of the New Testament today.
Exactly. He kept to the various independent communities connected to a larger, unified network.
It's an absolute masterclass in decentralized viral movement building. I mean, he intimately understood the ancient Jewish scriptures, but he also deeply understood the surrounding pagan culture.
Right. He knew the trade routes, the philosophical pain points of the people.
He seamlessly wove between those worlds to communicate his message.
He was a definition of what these sources call a true scholar. Someone who engages in an exact study of the texts in dynamic interaction with the surrounding culture.
He didn't isolate himself.
No, he understood the worldview of his audience, which allowed him to introduce his radical message in a framework they could actually comprehend and adopt.
Okay, so if you're listening to this and you want to do what Paul did, if you want to move from surface-level skimming to actual mastery of these ancient texts, whether for your own personal faith, for historical curiosity, or just academic rigor, you can't just rely on your gut feelings.
You really can't. Because, as we established at the beginning, you are separated from these texts by 2,000 to 4,000 years of culture, geography, and language.
The gap is just too big.
Relying on your modern intuition is a guaranteed path to that pooling of ignorance we talked about.
So to bridge that massive historical gap, the sources lay out a highly specific mini-library.
Yes, the tools of the trade.
These are the practical tools that any serious learner needs to have on their desk to actually uncover the author's intent. Let's walk through them.
It's a very practical 4-part toolkit. First, you need 2 good translations of the text.
2 translations, okay.
The sources recommend pairing a highly literal, word-for-word translation, like the NASB, with a more dynamic, thought-for-thought translation, like the NIV.
So you can see the text from 2 different angles.
Exactly. This helps you see the range of meaning in the original Greek or Hebrew without having to learn the ancient languages yourself.
That's super practical. Second, a concordance. Think of this as a physical search engine for a book.
A search engine is a great way to describe it.
Yeah, because words change meaning over time. A concordance lets you look up a specific word, like koinonia, and see exactly how and where the author uses it throughout their other writings.
It's vital for understanding how the author defines their own terms, rather than relying on a modern dictionary.
Right. And what's the third tool?
Third, a Bible dictionary. This is essential for historical and cultural background.
Like understanding the Roman Empire.
Yeah. If you want to understand the political climate of first century Rome, the mechanisms of the local trade routes, or if you just need to figure out which of the many people named John the text is referring to in a specific chapter, you really need a specialized dictionary.
Makes sense. And finally, the fourth tool is a 1 or 2 volume commentary.
Right.
This gives you access to scholarly opinions and historical research on specific confusing verses. It helps you see how experts have wrestled with the text over the centuries, keeping you grounded in historical reality.
The overarching point here is that understanding this material isn't a weekend project.
No, it's a lifelong journey that requires real diligence. It's an intellectual and spiritual journey that respects the profound weight of the material.
This raises an important question, and the material uses a brilliant quote from a scholar named Edward Farley to frame it.
Oh, I love this quote.
Farley basically asks why we see highly educated professionals, scientists, lawyers, bankers, people who master incredibly complex, nuanced disciplines in their secular careers.
Right. Brilliant people.
Why do they remain at a literalist elementary school level in their religious and philosophical understanding?
That is such a sharp critique.
Yeah.
Are we willing to put the same level of rigorous, structured study into our foundational beliefs in history as we do into our careers, our sciences, and our modern technologies?
It really challenges you.
The sources are challenging the reader to treat this ancient text with the profound intellectual weight and historical respect it deserves.
It's a call to intellectual maturity, to move past the shallow, what it means to me skimming, and step into the hard, rewarding work of mastery.
So what does this all mean? Let's trace the journey we've been on today. We started by looking at the danger of our modern, postmodern reading habits.
Rejecting that what it means to me culture.
Right. Learning that to truly respect an ancient text, you have to hunt for the original author's true intent. You have to seek out the big meta-narrative rather than getting lost in the inductive trap of studying isolated pixels.
We then use that lens to examine Luke's meticulous history, discovering that the Book of Acts isn't a random collection of stories. It's a deliberate, six-panel architectural blueprint documenting a movement's expansion.
And we saw that this explosive strategic growth wasn't fueled by a rigid corporate structure.
Not at all.
It was driven by a radical, shared koinonia, a common enterprise of mutual survival, and the brilliant, decentralized, adaptable strategy of the Pauline cycle, spreading through the ancient internet of the Agoras.
All of which requires us today to roll up our sleeves, build a proper mini-library, and do the rigorous work of deep reading to bridge the thousands of years between us and those original authors.
For you listening, acquiring this kind of deep historical wisdom is the ultimate antidote to the shallow information overload of our modern age.
It really is.
Understanding the why and how of history's most viral movement doesn't come from a quick internet search. It requires stepping into the shoes of the original authors.
And as we close, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over, building on the mechanics of growth we've explored today.
Let's hear it.
We saw how the early church thrived on koinonia, a true common enterprise that demanded radical solidarity and shared resources in the face of adversity. Think about the modern communities, the startups, the neighborhoods, or the causes that you are trying to build today.
Yeah.
If you stripped away the modern corporate hierarchy, the shallow social media connections, and replaced it with a true first-century koinonia, what would your community look like tomorrow?
That is a phenomenal question to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep reading, keep questioning, and keep digging deeper. Because the next time you stumble across an ancient letter, you'll know exactly how to read it.